I'll sort of try to summarize everything onto what is SPA, and how we can do that in Angular. And my assumption is that you guys at least have some sort of a basic understanding in JavaScript, and maybe you have tried Angular before. Maybe you are familiar with the term SPA or SPA, or whatever suits you. Um, so yeah, so my assumption is that, and if you are like super expert on Angular, then uh, I don't think this session will give you a in-depth understanding, or rather try to broaden your knowledge. I'm trying to focus on the people who don't understand these frameworks, UI frameworks, front-end frameworks, things like that. I think the whole goal of this series of sessions that the faculty does is to give you some sort of starting point on how to learn these things. So my goal is also that. And in the middle of the presentation, or at the end of the discussion, if you guys have any questions, you can let me know. If not, you can also contact me later via email if you need additional help, or related to anything. Yeah, so we can start. So single page applications. Let's try to break the session down first. I'll sort of This is not in specific order. Sorry, I'll try to give you guys an understanding on what is Angular routing, components, and two-way binding, and things like that. Middlewares and facades, those are not actually Angular specific components or other uh, Angular specific things. Those are common to every framework, every design pattern, or rather every architecture, not even inside Angular. Facades and middlewares, so you can find them in every application, every language, every framework. But for the sake of this session, I'll try to focus on those things a little bit too, uh, because going into that extent is like some sort of touching the uh, medium level of uh, medium level of knowledge uh, basis, because those are not too advanced, right? But if you are doing your level 2 project, and maybe if you are starting to going to, since I think this is the target audience, since you will be having interviews for internships coming up, then in those interviews, if you say you are familiar with Angular or any other front-end framework, then the interviewer might ask what is a middleware, and things like that. Because speaking from my experience, when I was interviewed for this ATL position, I was also asked what is a middleware. So I guess knowing that will help you guys. But keep in mind that middlewares are not specific to Angular. They can be found in everywhere. Also, this facades as well. So let's move on. What is an SPA? And a single page application is sort of again a web application. But typically, when you guys implement web apps or other websites, what you do is you write to HTML, then the JavaScript, then the CSS, right? And then you link your HTML and JavaScript and CSS files to that HTML using a link tag or script tag, right? So what happens is when you do a single page application, uh, what happens is this. this architecture actually tries to sort of update the application or the HTML without doing a page reload, right? If I try to give you guys an understanding on what I said. So earlier, what in when the internet was invented, using HTTP, uh, hypertext transfer protocol, what we do is we um, send a request for a resource. Resource can be an HTML file, it can be a CSS file, anything. What the server does is it sends the HTML, or rather it transfers the HTML over this protocol HTTP, right? It uh, always what it does is transfer documents back and forth, uh, maybe mainly the text or other HTML, right? Hypertext markup language transferred through hypertext transfer protocol. What happens is now when we try to this in an single page application, uh, when we send the initial request, let's assume google.lk, it sends you the layout of the application, basic HTML or other first page, right? And then for all subsequent requests, we are not actually getting HTML. We only get the data which needs to be rendered or rather, changed so that we can show it in the page that we got uh, in the earlier uh, initial get request. So, sorry. Uh, in another word, you only get the data for that application from the server, from the backend, whatever you want to call it. You don't get any HTML, or you don't have to load the entire application again and again uh, with JavaScript or CSS. Now, if you go to like, let's assume you have some sort of a, okay, let's take our UOM website, and let's assume that our UOM.lk, um, we have a contact page. And if you go to um.k/contact, the contact page is not received as an HTML. What happens is the application detects that you are trying to navigate to the contact page, and it sends all the information or other data which needed to be rendered that contact page to your browser. Now, the browser is the person or rather the entity which will convert that data set into whatever the page format that the user should see, right? So all those rule sets, CSS, JavaScripts, logic, and everything is everything you have from your initial GET request. All subsequent requests are, data or other in computer, software engineering terms, we call it JSON objects, right? Um, uh, so JSON stands for JavaScript object notation, if I'm not mistaken. So I'll show you how what is a JSON object and how does it look like. Um, uh, so JavaScript object notation is sort of a way of specifying a set of data or other information, uh, which is very easy to transfer using HTTPS or HTTP. And because they are lightweight, there are associated advantages of that, but our focus today is not JSON. So therefore, we'll move on. So if you like, when you work with any front-end framework, then you will get to know what is JSON. That is not a very uh, hard area to understand. So in terms of SPA applications or SPA, single page applications, one of the most important concepts that you need to know is routing. Because without understanding routing, you cannot get into any UI framework or front-end framework. Maybe you are trying to learn React, or maybe you are trying to learn Vue, right, or Next or anything. Without understanding routing, you cannot understand the framework. So uh, basically, it is not that hard. So you know what's a route is. Route is a sort of sorry, a pathway, right? So if you want to, so the application tries to determine what is the resource that you're trying to locate, right? Using the URL or other uniform resource locator. So in the early example, which I said, if you want to navigate to the contact us page for University of Moratuwa website, you'll go to um.ak/contact or other contact us, whatever is applicable in our site. So the UI or the front-end framework will determine what is the page. Okay, the user is requesting to go to the contact page. Then what it does is it forwards the request as we saw in this diagram, SPA lifecycle. What it does is it sends an AJAX request, asynchronous JavaScript language, asynchronous JavaScript request uh, to the server saying the user is asking for the contact us page. So then the server is responsible for sending the relevant information to the client or other browser in our case. We can so that we can determine or rather render that component. So routing is the process of determining what is that component. In our case, it is contact us. So uh, routing also has four major things. These are not taken from any textbooks or something. Uh, I'm just telling you that you have to understand these four things to understand routing. These are not that not very hard things to understand. I'll show you guys in a demo how these things are working, right? So first thing is you have to map your URLs. Then you have to uh, implement the routing based on that mapping. And then what happens now is after doing that, you have to render that component in the HTML page. And then you have to manage the history. History in the sense, that a browser also has a separate API. So if you like, you go navigate forward and backward in a browser, you use usually if you're using touchscreen, you use swipe. If you're using a desktop, you'll use forward and backward buttons. And browser also keeps history. You can view your browser history as well, right? So whenever we try, navigate between pages, contact us. Let's say there's another endpoint called uh, let's say projects, another endpoint called faculties. Things like that can be there. So as you now know that whenever we try to navigate between those routes, we are not actually navigating. We are not actually going to that page. We are requesting data, and depending on the data, the web application is changed or rather rendered, right? So therefore, there needs to be a way to sort of store this our history in the browser. Otherwise, we cannot go back and we cannot go forward, and we cannot see the history in the browser, right? Because we are actually not navigating again. We are just rendering the data, right? So to implement that also, we need to tap into the browser's API. and store our navigation or routes as history. When we go forward and backward. So that is also another important thing, right? These things happen under the desk when you do this using a framework, because frameworks handle these things without you knowing. You just have to implement the URL mapping and the component rendering part. Everything else will happen without you knowing on under the hood, because nowadays the routing or other routing libraries frameworks are capable of doing this automatically. I mean, that is the main reason why we have frameworks, right? Otherwise you'll have to do this manually. So let me try to uh, yeah, you can read this later. So these are the things in which I explained, right? So as I said, for every framework we have in React we have React router, in Vue we have Vue router, and in Angular we have Angular router. So every framework has this implementation now built into the framework. Um, I think earlier when React was introduced, React didn't have any router. React is actually a library, so therefore React had to use another library to implement routing. But now I think React also has an inbuilt router. I'm not very familiar, but you can read upon those if you are using it. Like if you don't have any interest in Angular, but you are a React expert, then you should know how the React has implemented routing as well. Right? Anyway, we'll move on. Um, as I said earlier, in this case, in this slide, so every subsequent request we are getting the data, right, as JSON. So assume you want to, then again, there's few issues. So now assume if your application is very large, maybe your JavaScript is JavaScript file alone is around 10 megabytes. That can be happening in some cases in large enterprise applications. That could be that could be happening because sorry, I have also seen web applications where when we send the initial get request, now you should know that we get all the JavaScript needs to render everything, right? All the CSS styles needs to be that needs to style your application. We get from the initial get request, right? So now assume your web application is like 10 megabytes or 20 megabytes large, then your initial page loading time will increase. It will take like to assume how many seconds which will take your mobile phone to download 10 megabytes, right? Could be 5 seconds, 10 seconds. It depends based on your connection. But in a web application, that time is very crucial, because usually if your website is or landing page of your website is not loaded within like 2 or 3 seconds, that will be a very bad user experience, right? So the issue with the SP applications is that, because if you're trying to uh, you know get all the information, that is the nature of SPA, right? When we send the initial GET request, we get all the JavaScript, CSS, and the layout of the HTML in the first GET call, in the first request. So, but in so that issue is also addressed in SPA applications using what is called or rather known as lazy loading. Then what this do is whenever if you have like a large application, then you can divide that application into multiple modules, and based on the route, again, based on the route, you can separately load that specific JavaScript, that specific CSS later. So your initial JavaScript file will be like a couple of kilobytes, and whenever you want to load the other parts of the application, you can send another GET requests to get the related JavaScript and HTML, CSS. So that is known as lazy loading. That functionality is also there, right? So I'm not going to touch how to do it, but I'll show you if the time permits. Otherwise, those things you have to like research on your own and learn it. But anyway, these things are not very hard if you're trying to get into front end frameworks. If you haven't touched a front end framework, some people like back end, working with data, SQL, right? They don't want to get into all this JavaScript nonsense. But there comes a time when you want to do this, because calling yourself a full stack developer is also always gives you an advantage over a back end developer, right? Because at this point, you want to get that advantage because you are still trying to get a job, you are still trying to get an internship, and going forward, of course, if you like work in the industry for 3 to 5 years, then you can categorize yourself as a back-end engineer or other back-end developer. But given the competitiveness of the industry and within the faculties and within the universities, you should get all the advantage uh, you know available to you, right? I mean that is a discussion for uh, a separate session, I guess, right? Anyway, so yeah, uh, lazy loading is the thing I said. So it helps you to manage your performance, application performance, by rendering components or requesting components only when they are needed, right? So I'll show you how they are implemented. But I'm not going to, go deep into all the features the framework has, because that is going to be like a 1 week session. But in this, I'll try to get you guys up and running and give you some basic understanding. So let me show you an implementation of a router, right? Let me go to my VS Code. Hope you guys still can see the screen. For the visibility, let me change the theme into maybe a white color theme. Otherwise, you will be having hard time reading whatever is displayed here, right? Okay, let me use this. And yeah, so I have a simple JavaScript router. Let me show you what is the HTML. So in the HTML, I have sort of a style tag where I define few styles for list items, which I'll be displaying in this HTML. And there's a nav tag, and inside the nav tag, I have uh, uh, unordered list and three list items, which are buttons. And let me try to increase the font size as well. Yeah, so in these buttons, we have a attribute called route, which is a custom attribute, and it has, the first one has the forward slash, the next one has the about, and third one is contact. These are very simple things you should know if if you know uh, JavaScript and CSS, because level 2 undergraduate, I think you should have this. It's okay you don't know anything about Angular or React, but if you don't know this, then you should be worried. Then you should be worried that um, I mean, you should have to understand basic things like that. So yeah, and I'm linking this client.js JavaScript file in the bottom of the page, and I have an empty div which I've given an ID called content. This is very simple. So this, assume this is your a SPA application or other Angular application, right? This is the only thing you get in the initial GET request. It will have this uh, div called content, and it will be linked to the JavaScript file, and it will have few styles, or rather all the styles as I mentioned earlier in the HTML. Now, if you go to the client.js, it will have a, this function will run on when the web page is displayed, which is why I'm using window onload. Now this function actually has defined a array of defined an object called routes. This is the mapping which I told you in the presentation, right? So what it does is this forward the single forward slash character is mapped to a function called home, and forward slash about text is mapped to the about function, and forward slash contact is mapped to contact function, right? And after that object is initialized, next I'll initialize or rather get whatever the routes available in the HTML. So in the HTML, I have these three, right? Same thing, it could be different, but in my case, those two things are same. I'm trying to get the active routes, meaning what are the routes which I have defined in my HTML. So in the HTML, I'm trying to get it from the query selector all function available in the JavaScript and catch the route attribute, which has been, specified in these buttons. And I'm, storing it into active routes variable. And the next, I'm trying to get whatever the current route which I'm in, so I can access that by window.location.path name. These are JavaScript functions or other properties. You don't have to worry about these things, how to implement. They are available in the JavaScript. You just have to use it, right? Um, right. So I now have whatever the routes defined in the HTML and what is the route which I'm currently in. I can access that using this property. And then I'm trying to determine what is the route handler function. So I told you in here, I have this object called routes, and inside that object, I have three functions defined. I mean, I have mapped each of these routes into functions, right? So those three functions are here, like function home, function about, function contact. Whatever that function is doing is it's trying to get the content element, which I have defined in the HTML using this ID content, right? And I'm trying to set that HTML inside that content into some sort of a text. Maybe could be HTML, could be, I mean, it has to be HTML with tags. You can use any set of tags, and it depends on whatever you want to show inside the contact page. So when we call the home function, it will set it to home page. And about when we set it, I mean, call the about function, it will set it to about page. And if we call the contact page, it will set it to contact page, text like this. And if we specified an unspecified route, which are not defined in here, here, it will show 404 not found page, or rather not found header. Only I'm using this for keep it simplicity, but you can define the entire page here, right? So I hope you understood that part. And in the route handler, what I'm doing is I'm trying to specify what is the function which I need to call. It could be home, it could be about, it could be contact. So now since I have the current path, could be either forward slash, either about, forward slash about, either forward slash contact. So now I can access this routes array and get the function using current path, which is what I'm doing here. If this inside the routes array, if I didn't found the current path, then I can just return not found. Not found is another function, right? So whatever this this O logic resolves will be stored in the route handler, which will be a function, and we can call that route handler here, right? So that is, these are basic JavaScript. I hope you guys understand. I try to, give you, give you a basic understanding. If you didn't still understand what is happening here, just let me know. Let me know. So basically, we are accessing the current path using the URL, which is displayed on your web browser, and we are trying to determine if there's a function assigned for that path. If there's no function assigned to that path, then it will call the not found. Otherwise, it will call the assigned function here from this object. Correct, right? Right. Now let's also assume like we have to, when we click on these buttons, we need to go to that route also, right? So to implement that one, let's add a event listener called click. We can, there are various events which we can listen to in JavaScript. So since this is not a JavaScript session, I'm not going to go into those areas, but just if if you are still not understand, I mean, if you don't know JavaScript as well, there are many events when we, when inside web page, right? Could be click, could be swipe, could be mouse hover, things like that can happen. So what we can do is we can listen to all those events using add event listener method, again a JavaScript method. So I'll loop through all the active routes, and for each route I'll add a event listener called click, and if this event is fired, then I'll call this function. So now again what happens is I'll try to get the path from that event, whatever the route attribute specified in that button, and that is the path. Now I'll again do the same thing. I'll try to get that path from the routes object which we have mapped earlier, and if that path is not there, then I'll call the not found. Otherwise, I should get the whatever the method which is defined from the routes method or other object. And now I'll use the window.history.push state to store that information in the browser history. Right? This is push state is from the browser API, web browser API. So you can use those push state, and there's another method as well, if I'm not mistaken. Let me check. Yeah, we have push state and we have replace state as well. We can use any of those to, access the browser's history API, and we'll do that as well. So this is a very simple script. Again, I hope you understood. I don't have time to go through this script again. You can just, read through it and understand what is happening. Very simple. It has three or four functions. The server JS, don't worry about this. I'm just running a node server as the web server. It will run my application inside a node server. It will also note that for any path, it will only return index HTML, right? It will not return any other uh, document. For all the requests, it will only return index HTML, right? There could be any, I mean, any if this is not handled, it will try to show you some sort of a not found error given from Node.js. We don't want the Node.js not found error. We want our node not found error. Therefore, for every request, it doesn't matter it is defined or not undefined in our routes array. It doesn't matter. For every request, we'll send the index HTML. That is the only thing you have to, put it into this server.js. Everything else is standard Node.js server stuff, which you will find in ChatGPT or internet, right? So I'll run this server now using Node server.js. Right. So now my server is running on port 300. I'll go to localhost /300. Okay. So now I have the I'm loaded. I have come to the contact us page. Let's try the click events. If I click on about, it will show me the about page, and it will show this path as well in the URL. So now under the hood, whenever I request this path, it will be sending only the HTML index.html, right? The only the first page is sending me. Now the JavaScript inside the HTML is responsible for showing me this about page. I mean this text about page. If I do this for contact also, that is what is happening. I am only receiving the HTML index HTML index only one HTML I have, right? So that page is so on the only thing I am getting, but this JavaScript inside the uh, page will determine whatever the content that it needs to show based on the path. Right? If I like navigate to one of these routes directly also, this should work. Right? So that is a basic router. So I hope you understand how to implement a routing. Implement routing. Uh, this is very simple. I mean, you can do that as well, but in a SPA application, this is like built into it, so you don't have to worry about. You just have to uh, specify what is the um, mapping of that route. So basically, this one. What is the function that we need to call whenever a path has been hit, right? Um, so let's try to create a Angular application as well, and I'll show you how routing has been implemented in Angular. Um, yeah, so I think I have created the application as well. Let me try to recreate another one. So basically, what you'll have to do is you have to install uh, Angular CLI. You can get it from a simple Google search. So yeah, if you have not installed, you can just run this command npm install of dash d Angular CLI, and then you have to run this command ng-new and followed by your project. So since I now have the um, CLI installed, I'll just run ng-new uh, this one with the app. What happens now is it will ask few questions. Uh, it will take like few seconds. So until I mean, we cannot wait until that. So I have uh, already created this with the application. Um, yeah. So it is this one. Whenever you open this application, what you will see is a set of files. You can see that we have tsconfig files, package JSON, Angular JSON, things like that, and we have the src folder. Inside src, we have this folder called app, and inside the app folder, we will have few files, CSS, HTML, and TypeScript files. And only thing you need to uh, worry about in this setup is to set the app routes here. So don't worry about all the other files. To get started, you don't have to worry about what is tsconfig. People might get scared when you try to start with an Angular application or any other framework, looking at all these file structures and files. They are to configure your application, not to scare you and uh, you know give you a hard time. Don't worry about this. These things are there to as per the purpose of configuration things like, you can, build your application to target latest uh, ES modules, and other things like if you want to have types mapped to the strict type mapping, things like that. There are, if I take like one configuration here, I can talk for like another 30 minutes. So about everyone, what is a source map, right? Those things are, you will get to know going forward. But don't worry about this. These are your, like default. We are starting with default configuration that then you should be able to, start the application with these uh, basic configurations. Yeah. So when we try to run a new application, uh, create a new Angular application, you will be asked what is the style sheet uh, uh, framework you want to use. I'll just use CSS. You can use SAS or less. There are many things like that, frameworks in terms of styling as well. But to get started, you can just use CSS. I click yes, and it is asking me if I want to enable server-side rendering and static site generation. I'll say no to this. Server-side rendering is another topic for another time. Uh, what it basically does is just like that lazy loading, it will uh, generate the HTML in the server and send the HTML to the client without sending the data, JSON. For every request, it will create the HTML in the server and send the HTML. It all depends on what is your requirement, right? So all those things are there just to configure your application. But then again, if you are trying to add lazy loading and your server-side rendering, then you are diverting away from the concept of single page applications, right? So those are there to mitigate the issues which we get when we are trying to build an application using SPA applications, SPA framework. Now it will create all these files that I showed you earlier. I'll let it run in the background. In the meantime, I'll show you what are the files which has been created earlier. So those are these are the files. So as I showed you. So let me show you the index.html first. So this is very similar to the one which I showed you in that JavaScript router example, right? It only has this tag called approot, and everything else is like meta tags, link tags, and nothing else, right? So what now happens is same thing what happened in the index HTML. It replaced this div ID content with our header, right? If you remember a few moments ago, right? So same thing is happening in this index HTML as well. It is replacing this or rather inserting the our resources, whatever the data or styles or logic into this tag, into this app root. So how it does it, how to configure this is something we'll have to configure ourselves. Let me try to do that. So as I showed you again, inside the app folder, we have a file called app routes. Now, this is an array. So into this array, we can specify same thing like what we did in this in here, right? If if the router engine came across this path, what is the function that it needs to run? Same thing we can configure in app routes. So in Angular, let's go to the slides a little bit before going forward. I have to tell you guys what the component is. Uh, the same thing like what I showed you in the simple JavaScript router. Where it is sort of a way of encapsulating all your JavaScript, CSS, And HTML for a single page could be a single page, could be a parent page. There can be multiple children pages inside that parent page, right? Just don't worry about all the terminology. It's just a way of containing uh, CSS, JavaScript, and HTML into a one reusable block, right? Let me try to create one, and I'll show you how to, you know, how that is happening. Let me switch the directory first. I'll go to the web app directory. Then there's separate commands for that as well. You can look them up in in here as well. It should be there. Um, ng generate, I think, is what I'm looking for. Yeah. So if you want to create a component, we'll just type ng generate component. Or rather, what is the name, right? And for short, we can type just ng space g space the component name. So this, since I'm trying to build a weather app, right, as the name implies, I'll try to create a component called current, so that I can display the current weather, right? So I'll issue command ng for component, right? For component, I can use that as well. I'm not with whether that is mentioned here. Um, yeah, it's very hard. Yeah, NGGC for component, and then the name, right? I'll just issue NGGC because it is easier. I'll just put current here, this one, and look at the directory structure. What will happen is it will put a directory inside the app folder with current. Right. So now you can see. So in the definition, I told you that a component is sort of a way of encapsulating all the HTML, CSS, JavaScript into a single, building block, reusable building block. So now inside this folder, we'll have everything which needs to build this component. We have the logic inside the TypeScript file, and we have the test. For the moment, or rather for this session, we'll forget about the spec.ts. This is a unit testing file. You will have to write unit tests for each of these components after building it. But for this session, we'll forget about it because that will, take this conversation dragging. And so for the moment, we'll focus on HTML, CSS, and the TS. Assume these are like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So for the current component, current with the component, if you need any styling, specific logic, you can put everything inside this class, TypeScript class, for logic related to the whatever the business logic you want to implement in current with the component, and related HTML can be here, and related CSS can be here. So this is a component in terms of Angular. So now in the routes, app routes, I'll say that if I get a request targeting this route, I need to move it to the current component, right? It is very easy. So now I'll uh, uh, open a open a curly brace, and I'll type path, and if the path is sorry, if the path, it can be any path, you can define it the way you want. I'll just use this name component, Uh, if the router engine came across this path, then load the component, uh, current component, right? Let's or create a home component as well, because then we can differentiate between two components. I have now the home component as well. So now I can give you another, I mean, give another uh, object to this as well, saying if there's no path, uh, meaning that if the path is like empty, like this, then the component will be the home component, right? So now this is here. So one other thing that you have to check after doing this is inside the app config ts, it has to be using these routes uh, as one of the providers, right? A provider, this is an array, as you can see from the notation. Um, so providers are a way of specifying a set of dependencies to the Angular application. Um, so in our case, the router, the Angular router is one of the dependencies of this application, right? So it has to be imported. You can see um the router this Angular router. We are importing the provide router method. Sorry, and we are passing these routes which we have defined in this app routes ts, and we are providing it to here. Um, yeah. So don't worry about all this, notation, and it is a way of configuring whatever the dependencies which we need to which needs to be available for the components, or rather for the entire application to work. Otherwise, this routing will not work, because we haven't said that our router is one of the dependencies for all the components in our application, right? So that is why it is provided into this providers array. There are many other configuration arrays which I'll not be touching in this session. But if you are want to learn, you can definitely go ahead and search these things. Yeah. Anyway, so what we have done is we have imported whatever the routes we have, and we have said that all the components in our application needs this routes to work. Otherwise, our application will not work. This is what we have said essentially, right? By specifying that in the providers array, right? If you have any other dependencies that needs to register, or other say that, okay, this this dependency also needs to be added, because our component need this dependency also, then you can put it here after a comma, right? We'll try to do that when we try to implement HTTP, server communication part, right? So now this should work, right? Let me try to spin up this application. I can just type npm run start. It will issue the command ngserve, which is defined in the package JSON. It has this, if I run the start command, it will run ngserve. Ngserve is a framework specific command. It uses the Angular framework to build this application and run the project. There are few commands, right? And all the dependencies we need, we haven't used any third party dependency. These are just, we have used few third party dependencies like rxjs, tslib, sonjs, which actually the Angular framework is dependent on these three frameworks. Other than that, everything is Angular dependencies, animations, command compiler, core, forms, platform browser, dynamic, and the router. See, this is a separate dependency here. But it comes pre-installed now. You don't have to install it. It comes installed, you just have to use it, right? So now you can see the application is building. Okay. So now our application is live at this location. Let's grab this and go to the web browser and paste it in. Right. So, okay. So we have this Angular specific style set, or rather, links to documentation and things like that. And we can see our home component is also loading here, because in the home component, we have in the HTML, we have this homeworks ptech. Now it is showing up, but we don't want this all this other default things to be showing in our home component. Right, so those things are defined, I think, in app component. Yeah. So let's remove these things and only keep the router outlet. So whatever rendered inside the router will be rendered inside the router outlet. Right? We'll keep that router outlet and remove everything else, because we only want the router outlet every time we try to navigate to a different route, things like that. So now homeworks comes as our default component. Now if I try to go to the / current, uh, right, it it is showing that current is also working. Right. So I hope you understood the concept of components. We can we can define many components like this, and we can have children components. We can have modules as well, and you know that is like going beyond whatever we have trying to focus today. So yeah, so I hope you understood that part, and the components. Let's try to further build this. First of all, let's try to focus on whatever our focus is. So when we use components, we will have the modularity, reusability, encapsulation, and composition, right? Which means that you can use this component everywhere. So in the you saw that in the app routes also, I use this as current component. In the component ts file, you have the selector. You can call this selector and render this in a separate component as well, right? Meaning that this can be used as a HTML tag. So now if I let's try to do that. I'm not sure that works. Okay. So here let me sorry. Um, let's try to do this. I think we have to import it here. Then sorry, right? So now inside the current component, I have used again the home. It could be a something different component, right? I'm just trying to demonstrate this concept, uh, because it says here we can use it anywhere using because it is reusable. Yeah. So inside the current component, now we can see the home component as well. In the home component, we only have the home component, but if you go to the current route, it will show a different component. So likewise, you can select any of these components and put it into anywhere else. So you have to understand that within a single component you can render multiple other components as well, right? So this is now inside the current component we have the home component. So the home component is a child of current component, which makes the current component a parent component, and home component is now a child component. So something like this can also be done. So to select this, I am using the selector specified in here, right? Select. And if you wanted, as I said, as I did in the current component, if you want another component to be imported into this component, you have to use the imports array, right? It is very similar once very, very easy once you understand what is happening. Don't make this that much harder than, frameworks are there to make your life easy. Otherwise, you will have to implement this using bare JavaScript, no? So yeah, don't complicate things. Just try to do the simplest approach when you're trying to learn something. Okay, so that is there, and let's move on because we are running out of time. And yeah, so in a component we have the HTML, and then we have CSS, uh, and sorry, the TypeScript, the logic, code which supports the data, or other logic and the data. And then we have the metadata like selectors. So metadata are the things that we saw here. So we have this the component followed by this at symbol, which is known as a decorator, right? So the component decorator is here. These are called a metadata. This is not actually part of our HTML or our logic. This is there to specify where things are, what are the dependencies, where is the HTML file, where is the CSS file, things like that are defined. This is metadata, things like that are there inside a single component. So we have now two components. Let's quickly try to show you the data binding stuff. And let me call, yeah, let me try to use the freely available API because we need a server, and I don't have a server. So I'll use open with the API, right? This is a free way API. If you, create an account, and if you go to their documentation, you can use this API, for basic stuff. For everything else, you have to pay. But for this one, I'll use the current forecast with the data collection. And if I go to my account, I can see that I have my API keys. So when you create an account, uh, you will have to, you will get um, a API key. You have to keep that, securely, like this one. So this is one of the keys because we need this key to make requests. Now, I'll be deleting those later, by the way. And so let me see. So I'll go to the current with the uh, API documentation here, and I'll use the built-in API for API request for city name, request by city name. So now if I go to this URL, right, using the city name and API key, which has been provided here, I should be able to get the weather information for that city, right? So that is how an API works, basically, right? I'll give the city name as, let's say Moratuwa, and my API key is, let me copy that uh, from the here and put it here. I should be able to get this. And let me check this pretty print. So this is what is known as a JSON object, which I told you earlier, JavaScript object notation. So this is a sort of a JSON object. It returns set of data. Now I have to render this data inside my component by calling this API, right? So that is also like not that hard. I'll have to create first of all a service, right? Service means a common place where I can store all this, um, API calls and the common things for the application, because I may be able to, I might need to use it somewhere else as well, not only this component, in the current component. If I put it in here, if I want to use that API in somewhere else, then I'll have to rewrite that in that component as well. No? So therefore, I'm trying to keep that API call in a single place. So let me create a folder called services, and inside services, I'll generate a service, which is another uh, sort of a uh, functionality available in Angular. Within a service, you can put all the common code, common logic, uh, and then you can use that service to, I mean, again, sort of a modularized way. You can use that component in everywhere in your application. So I'll just create one without talking about it. Ng generate service for S, and inside the services folder, yeah, I'll create with nggs for service, right? Ng, and because I have to provide the folder as well, because Angular doesn't know where to put it, folder / and the service name. Uh, okay, sorry, I'll move into the with the app and issue the same command. Right, so it has created two files. Again, the spec file, which is the unit test file, which we will forget about for the moment. And inside here, we have this. Right, so here I need to import another dependency again. Also, you can see another decorator here called injectable, which means that now we can use this dependency in every component, in all compo or in in any of the components, using what is known as a dependency injection design pattern. I think which if you were there in my last design patterns session, you should know this. Otherwise, this is what is known a design pattern. I'll show you guys when we are injecting it. So here, what we'll do is create a simple server request or other HTTP request to the API or rather the service that we API that we got, right? I'll create a method here. I'll say get current weather. It's a method. Now this method will accept a parameter called city, and it will be a type of string, right? And it will return an observable. This is TypeScript, right? This is not Angular. Again, this is TypeScript. Observable is a way of writing asynchronous operations, because we don't want to do anything unless this request resolves. Unless we get the data from the API, we don't want to move forward, right? If you want to do that in any application, you have to use asynchronous programming, because you have to sort of differentiate what is longer running processes from your frequent processes. So therefore, an observable is sort of a way to implement that in Angular, right? There are many other ways as well, but this is something very easy. It is imported from RxJS, again another JavaScript library. We don't want to go deep into what is RxJS. That is another week week long discussion, right? But just keep in mind that every time you want to call a server or call an API, you just have to mark the return type as an observable for the moment. And the return, the type of the returned object can be we can define it also. Let's for the moment we'll say it can be any type. We can provide a type definition as well, but for the moment, let's say it can be anything, right? Now, what will return is let's create. Let's first of all try to get the HTTP client provided by the Angular because we need to call an HTTP resource now because this URL is uh, an HTTP resource. Let's just copy this and let's keep it here. Let's say this is URL is type of string. So this is the URL now. So this is sorry. So this is we are calling an HTTP endpoint, right? So therefore we need to get the help from HTTP client provided by again Angular. Now I'm using this constructor to get that dependency. So whenever you try to do this, use the constructor to get get any dependency. We call it dependency injection. Now built-in Angular HTTP client is again built as a injectable resource. So therefore we can inject it to the constructor and we can use it inside the the class. In this case, our class is weather service. Now this dot HTTP and since this is a get request, right? Because we are asking for a resource, not sending a resource, not updating a resource, or not deleting a resource. Therefore, we have to use the get method. And again, for the moment, we'll say the return type can be any type because at the moment, let's assume we don't know what is the type. And our URL is this URL which we have specified here. Yeah, it should be this dot URL, right? Yeah. And observable is giving me a show. Okay, should return a value. Sorry. So we have to return this. Right. Now you can see that get method also returns an observable, right? HTTP client provided by Angular get method also returns an observable. Therefore, our get current with the method also returns an observable. These things should match, otherwise we cannot put return here directly, right? Now we'll use it. So now this weather service also injectable, right? So let's go to our client component, sorry, current component, and let's create the constructor inside this class. I think it's this. Yeah, inside the constructor, let's inject that again. What we did to the HTTP client, we'll say private current weather service, right? Now we'll import it. Current was it? Oh, sorry, weather service, right? Yeah, weather service. Let's rename this to weather service. Now we have injected it. Uh, so without that injectable decorator inside the weather service, we cannot do that. That is the purpose of this. This is a decorator, one of the metadata provided in this weather service, right? So now you can see there are like tons of terminology uh, associated with these frameworks. So if you are afraid of terminology, words, then you cannot learn a new language. Don't be afraid. They are just a way of describing what is happening, right? So now we have injected our dependency using dependency injection into the current component using this constructor. So now we can use it, right? So let's for using it, let's create a simple form. I'll just type. Let's remove this app home. I don't need it. I'll put a input element. Input. We can use input without, I think, ending. Let's say our type is text type, because I want to type the city name, right? And I'll bind this. Now we are coming to this data binding part of Angular. So data binding is a way of synchronizing, or rather sharing data between the UI and application state. Application state in this case is our TypeScript file, because whatever weather information we get from this service will be available in the TypeScript file, or this class, right? But we have to show it in the HTML. So therefore, we need to bind these two together, right? There are many ways to do that. So we can use interpolation, property binding, event binding, two-way binding, things like that. So let's use, in our case, two-way binding, because that is one of the revolutionary things which was introduced in Angular when it was launched, right, back in the day. So so it means that whatever two-way means, as the name implies, whatever we type, I mean, whatever we have in the HTML can be available in the TypeScript. Whatever available in the TypeScript can be available in the HTML. But so both for both ways it will work. So to specify two-way binding in the notation, you can see that we have to provide this square bracket and normal bracket. Inside that we have to provide the ng model. So let's do that. Um, don't worry about the syntax and the notation words. Those you can find them on ChatGPT, or in the documentation. Just understand the concept, and then you can learn that going forward. Now I'll give a name to this variable, which is city. Now it's giving me an error. Let's check. Okay, so to use ng model, we have to, I think, import uh, something or other. Let's see. It has to be in the current component. Yeah, we'll import common module. Oh, sorry. So since we are now building a form, right? So we have input field, and we'll have a button later. So that is a form. So therefore, we'll have to import forms module, if I'm not mistaken. Otherwise, we'll have to use ChatGPT or Google again. Yeah. So now that error is gone. Now it's complaining city is not available, because I'm saying that now use the city variable to bind this input element, but I don't have any city available in my class. Let's you know initialize that. City is a string, and default value is empty, right? Okay. Now we have a way to store our city. We when we type on this input text. So now I'll also add a button as well, because I need to call that method which we have created. Again, it is going to be an input. Right, input, this is type of button. Okay, and button. Now another way of binding is event binding. Now you know what is event, right? We saw that we have listened for a click event. Here also we'll try to do the same thing, but now we are trying to catch that event and fire that method we have created. So event binding, we can use this using only the normal brackets, right? So I'll say, okay, we have like, you can see we have multiple methods, blur, cancel, change, click, close, copy, things like that. I'm using the click event. When someone click on this button, I want to, okay, I want created a method. Let's create a method display temperature. Okay, I'll implement this method later. For the moment, I'll say when I click on this, call this method, right? And yeah, and in the button, I'll say in the text of the button, I'll say, okay, show temperature, right? Now, in this method, I'll call the get current data method, which we have defined in the we need to in the service, and we need to pass an argument, which is the city, which is this dot city. And yeah, so this is now an observable. I'll show you how to consume an observable. We are calling it as subscribing. We can subscribe to a method or other observable, and after subscribing we can show data. So this is sort of a syntax. This syntax you don't have to keep in mind. Since this is returning an observable, this is how we can get that information. We are using this subscribe method to get that information. We can say whenever the data is available, right? We can please do whatever's inside this function, and if there's an error, do whatever inside this function, and after everything is completed, do whatever inside this function. Sorry. Now, for the moment, let's just worry about when the data is available. What I want to show is let's create another variable, temperature. Uh, temperature, right? Can be string or number, depends on whatever you want, right? String, when we start it, it can be empty, or we can say it is undefined as well if we type this exclamation mark here, so that you don't have to initialize every time when we define a variable, right? Okay, so I'll just use this variable now, this dot temperature. Now we'll have to, okay, this it is this dot, yeah. Now we have this data, so we'll give a variable to this data, which is returning when we subscribe. Again, similarly, if your error has some sort of a error message, you can say error or other ERR, and it can be like, most of the time it is HTTP error response, this one, and you can maybe console that log, console log it into the console. Yeah, so log, right? And you can error dot message, something like that you can do. Yeah, so for the moment, let's use this. I have just given a variable to whatever the data returned from this subscription. That is all. Don't worry about how this data is coming from. And so to get the temperature, we'll have to look at that JSON object to understand where the temperature is coming from. So it is inside main sub or other child object, and inside main I have temp. I think this is coming as Kelvin, so we'll have to like substitute or rather subtract 273, right, if I'm not mistaken. I think there's some sort of decimal points as well, but for the moment let's subtract 273. Or is it 272? I'm not very familiar now, but yeah, you got the idea, right? So whatever the object that we get, we have to determine where our information is coming from. It is coming under the main object, the temperature property. So let's say in our here, let's say it's data dot main dot temp, right? And we'll show this temperature in the HTML as well. So now I'm using this interpolation to bind the temperature into the HTML, which can be we can use this uh, curly braces. We can use also this if switch for loops while while is not there. I think we can use differ here. Things like that are they are available starting from Angular 17. So yeah, so these things are there. So I'll use if here. I'll say if we have any if we have temperature, I mean if we have a value in the temperature, right? Let's show it in a p tag. So I'm now using interpolation. I can put temperature here. Else, I'll put no temperature, no data or something, right? Okay, let's try to. Okay, it should be compiled now. Let's see if there are any errors. We have screwed up somewhere. Let's go to the localhost Angular application here, and let's go to the weather. Sorry, current, right? Okay, seems like there's an error. Let's check. Okay, so we have an error again. Our issue no provider for HTTP client. So yeah, again we have to go to the app config, and we'll have to the thing I mentioned earlier. Now we'll have to add another element array because we need to now import early, just like we imported the router. Now we have to import the HTTP client as well, right? So to do that, let's again look at the documentation. Yeah, let let me see. Let's go to HTTP client Angular, and you should be able to see how to use this. Um, yeah, it is just the I think reference. I know I need a. Let's take okay. Let's take this one. Understanding, communicating with backend, and yeah, let's set up server communication. Okay, so in the providers, we have to do this import providers from HTTP client module. We'll do that and import both of these. Right now, we should be able to see. Let's check. right? So now it says no temperature, I mean, no data available. Let's open the dev tools as well so that we can see the network call here, right? So now let's say Colombo, and it will say whether this is the request that we sent. We have sent two parameters. The Okay, we are sending Moratuwa. We'll have to change our weather service to use this city, right? So we'll use string interpolation to remove the city from the API call and put it into this URL, right? We'll use the backticks and put it here and remove the city from here and something like this you can do. We are, removing or other substituting this query parameter with whatever the city that we get when we call this method, right? We don't need this anymore. So now when you say, okay, Colombo, Colombo temperature is somewhat similar tomorrow to now. Let's try to re, um, um, yeah, let's try to reduce or rather convert this to Celsius. I'll just for the moment subtract 273 um, and now it's complaining that my temperature value variable is a string. Now if I do this, it will convert it to a number. So now I'll have to mm, change it to a string again before showing it. Okay, so it has like many in decimal places. We can like do that as well using another language feature or other framework feature in Angular called pipes. You can format whatever the outputs that you get using pipes. So I'm not going to deep dive into Angular pipes. You can just go ahead and see for yourself. But since in this case we just want to uh, limit this number into like maybe two decimal places, I'll use the uh, number pipe and say that uh, I just want two decimal places, minimum two decimal places, minimum uh, you know, two decimal places and maximum two decimal places. Now to use pipes also, I need to import another module. I think here, let's say, I think it's in common module, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So knowing what module to import, right? What component to import, that is something that you get from experience or using this framework or, searching on Google, right? So yeah, it is not something that you get when you're born, right? You have to learn it, learn the framework, maybe like, few weeks. Then you should know what is the module which you are missing, right? So if you're using form related things, you need to import forms module. And if you're using something like Angular framework specific common functionality, you need to import common module. Things like that. Those are built-in libraries inside Angular. So yeah. So now this thing I guess will limit the output to only two decimal places. Yeah. Let's say Colombo again. Yeah. So now we can also show the city here as well when we type it. right? Like this. So you will know what is two-way binding now. So if I type here, you can see that here also it is, typing it. My city, this ng model city variable is now accessible through HTML. It's also now accessible through the component TS file or the other TypeScript as well. Yeah, that is a two-way binding, which is at the time was a very revolutionary feature because at the time we had to implement this using you know our own methods. So yeah, that is also there. Yeah. So I guess that is basically what you need to know in terms of Angular to maybe call an API and get some data and show it in so the styling CSS, I'm not going to focus. That is something you can do using, maybe ChatGPT, or, you can import entire templates of HTML, CSS using internet. You can do that. Maybe you can use a, UI library. There are free UI libraries which you can use if you like do a quick Google search. You can use Angular UI libraries using maybe GitHub, right? Component libraries. Those are there, just like in React. But the functionality part, you have to, put some effort to. But I guess I hope you now at this point know some basic understanding on how to do very simple things. Because most of the time when we are using front-end frameworks, what we'll be doing is calling an API and display the data, right? Everything else is just CSS styling, wrapping it up in a nice package. Other than that, everything else is what we are doing here, right? Or calling or rather sending data or calling data. You're using forms. You can import like material, right? If it's just Angular material, it is a different library. And you can use Bootstrap as well. Those things are there. You can find many tutorials on that. Yeah. Apart from that, so this is the syntax which I showed you, right? And middlewares and services. Services I showed you. It is a way of, you know, uh, having these things in a single place. You can have another method to display hourly forecast, another method to display the cloud coverage, things like that. So if you have this now, since this is now an injectable, or rather we can use it everywhere using a constructor or other dependency injection, uh, just like the way I have used that in the current component, because I have injected it here, right, with the service. Similarly, you can inject it to anywhere. So what happens is, so if you have multiple services, you can create another service which will call a facade. And what a facade do is, you know, uh, modularize multiple services into one service. So you can have many services in your application, and using a facade, you can, have that all that services in one service. So I'll show that in this diagram. So now I assume in the left hand corner, uh, or rather, yeah, left hand corner, we have this again an injectable called auth service, data service, and a logger service, right? You can have these services can be in separate files, right? And but usually we use one class in one file, but you can have, in a single file, you can have multiple classes as well. Uh, but what is, what you have to understand is these are three separate services designed to do three separate things. Auth service will focus on authentication things. Data service will focus on data related, and or logger will focus on logging things. But if you create a facade, again another service, just the name we are calling is at a facade. We can inject, because these are injectable, we can inject all these three services into one service using the constructor, and we can use a login get data, and log, separate methods to, use all these three services. Because there can be operations where we need to, first of all, authenticate and log something back. Maybe the user's profile picture or, something like that. We have to do it in one go. But if we have those two functionalities in two separate services, we have to call those two separate services, right? No. Let me charge. Get my charger. Yeah. So these we have to call two separate services to get one single thing done. No? So therefore, we can use a facade, which is again a service. You can call methods inside two, maybe two separate services within a single method, right? It's not that hard. Again, as I told you in the beginning, these are not Angular specific. This is not Angular specific pattern. It is we can find that everywhere in, software engineering facades, right? And I'll probably get back to what is a middleware as well. In Angular, again, middlewares are not specific to Angular. They can be found everywhere in the software engineering frameworks and, and design patterns. In terms of Angular, a facade or rather middleware is a interceptor. We call them interceptors in Angular. What it does is it sort of tries to intercept the request and modify the request, maybe, or change or other remove, do things like that to the request, and they can forward it to the server. When a response also comes, an interceptor can modify the response and change it or return it to the Angular application. Um, so yeah, let's try to within 5 minutes. Let's try to implement an interceptor or rather a middleware in Angular, because now we have this um, what is called HTTP weather service, right? Let's try to create an interceptor. Again, it is something similar to when we create every other thing. Let's uh, run the command ng interceptor. We'll use this one, but we'll call it something else. Let's call it HTTP interceptor. I'm putting it inside inside a folder called interceptor because it's easier so that we can modify. So again, we have the spec file and we are not focusing on specs. So this is basic interceptor. So here what I can do is because we have access to the request, see, so it just intercepts the request and it forwards it. That is the meaning of the syntax. It intercepts the request, right? Intercepts the request and it forwards the request. Before forwarding it to anywhere, I mean, forward it to obviously the server, we can access whatever available in the request here. So we can use console, maybe console log. Let's log the URL first, right? You can say request dot body clone context headers method, anything. We can say URL for the moment because we want to, uh, you know, request the sending part. So here we'll say, um, let's say this is the outgoing request, right? So let's say this is the outgoing. And yeah, so if you want to intercept the incoming requests, you can do it here. So we can catch the incoming request here. So here we'll use few RxJS operators. You don't have to worry about what is RxJS for the moment. So these are a way to, RxJS is a way of, dealing with observables uh, HTTP requests, data, things like that. So there are few methods. You saw that observe, subscribe is one of those. So pipe is another one. And there's another thing that we need to use, which is tab. These things are not actually very beginner friendly. So therefore, like if you feel like you don't want to learn this, that is fine. But just keep in mind that these kinds of things can be done using Angular. Otherwise, you haven't learned the basic things or other whatever uh, the framework specific stuff, right? Because they are available. If you don't know whether these are available, then you don't know what you can do using the framework, right? So I'll check if this event is a type of HTTP um, response, right? If this is HTTP response, then I'll console log the same thing. This is now an incoming request. So since now we have access to all the, um, I mean, what you call outgoing request and to the incoming request, we can do modifications to the outgoing request here and for the incoming request, I mean, incoming data here, right? So for every HTTP request, this interceptor will intercept it, right? So inside the interceptor, you can decide what HTTP requests you want to intercept, what HTTP requests you want to, leave it as it is, right? So let's say event body here because most of the time we want to access the data, and I'm getting an error in the tab uh, operator because it cannot find it. Let's try to import it from RxJS, right? Okay, so now this should work. How to modify the outgoing request, how to modify the incoming request, I'll leave it out for the moment because we are running out of time. But it is very easy. You can inbuilt methods there are, so you can utilize those to uh, intercept and change things. So as an example, I can show. I mean, I'm not going to show you. I can tell you. So here, for every request, we need to send this app ID, right? The API key which I got from the OpenWeb. So every request I have to send this. Now what I can do is remove this entire part from the URL because there can be many other methods, right? So for the moment I'm only having current in there. So in the future I can have many methods, maybe get the weekly forecast, daily forecast. But for every request I have to send this. So using an interceptor, what I can do is intercept the outgoing request and change the request URL to have the tab ID every time. So I don't have to worry about sending it in the services. I can modify the request in the interceptor, right? So those kinds of things we can do very easily. But I'll leave that to you guys. Yeah. So since we now have interceptors defined for HTTP, I have to, say that in the providers now uh, I have the HTTP client, but now it has something called an interceptor also configured, right? So let me say that as well. I'll say provide instead of import, I'll say provide. Um, uh, you must be thinking how to know this. This is, documentation. You can find this, and if you work with interceptors, and if you like want to, implement uh, an interceptor, finding how to do it is very easy, right? Yeah. So I'll say with interceptors. I think it's this one. Sorry, not from DI, just with interceptors. And I'll say what is the interceptor. We can have an array of interceptors. We have only one, right? We can say HTTP interceptor. Is it this? Yeah. Okay, since I have given HTTP interceptor in the name, it has, appended another interceptor word. But anyway, yeah. So you understand, right? So this should now work. Let's see. Let's go to the application and let's look at the console and let's send Colombo. Yeah, okay. Let's rename this to incoming. That is it. Yeah. Outgoing request, not incoming. This response. Right. So let's say Moratuwa. See, I have the outgoing request URL and I have the incoming response as well. Clouds, VOD, coordination, and inside the main, I have the temperature max, sea level, the pressure, things like that, humidity. So I can use any of this data in here. So in terms of interceptors, or rather in our case, in terms of middlewares, I hope you understood what is a middleware is, right? So interceptor is kind of a middleware, right? In Angular, that is how we are going to implement middlewares. We are calling them as interceptors because middlewares are not specific to Angular. It can be found everywhere. So this is another implementation of a. So this is what we have done, right? Here, yeah. So this one. So you can modify these things. Uh, you know, uh, you can do a basic Google search and get on how to modify. You can clone this request and modify it. Um, it's very easy. And yeah, so I think we covered everything, like what we have planned. Other than that, I think this is a very broad area in terms of Angular because it from version 17 it has introduced many new features, right? And we don't have time to go every aspect of the framework, but to get you started, I hope this helped you guys. If you have any questions, you can contact me over this link, or you can access the source code from this link. If you want to try out, learn Angular, you should follow this Angular tutorial. I mean, given by Angular team itself, calling the Tour of Heroes. This is a very simple application. At the end, you will build something very, with routing, with data binding, something, you can understand all the concepts. If you follow this tutorial, it will have like, 6 chapters, very simple chapters, heading services, navigation, components. Yeah. So you can follow that tutorial if you are like want to learn a bit more. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.